excited to talk to you about Foraging 101 and what I have been doing for the last 20 years in Washington and for many more years before that in California. And particularly in the pandemic, I have had time and opportunity to do even more wandering and foraging and experimenting than usual. So when Diane asked me to do this, I was excited to have a chance to pull together some of my pictures and also, as she mentioned, get ready for a course that I'm going to be teaching at Georgetown this fall, which somehow I will manage to do probably online in urban foraging. So with that, here we go. Okay, so here's the outline of what I'd like to cover today. I'm going to start briefly with a little introduction to why we might want to forage, and then spend a little bit of time on basic guidelines and cautions about foraging. And I don't want to scare you all too much, but nobody should go around eating things if they don't know what they are. So we'll talk about that a little bit. Talk about which different parts of plants we eat and the importance of seasonality in foraging. And then I'd like to take a little break for questions. As Diane mentioned, you can type questions into the chat when you think of them, and we can address them at the halfway point there, or you can save them to the end. Then I will show you some of my favorite plants that I have been eating this year and in years past, and also a few things that I tried that I can tell you not to waste your time because I didn't think they were so great. Then we'll take a look at what's available right now in the district, and I meant to say that the panel on the front, the first slide, was stuff that my dog and I picked this morning at Fort Reno, and which we will be having for dinner after the talk is over, but we'll come back to that in a little while. And then we'll look ahead to see what we can look forward to in the late summer and fall. And then at that point, we'll have time for more discussions and questions. And as those of you who know me know, I'm sort of the queen of digressions. So I'm going to try to keep to the straight and narrow to some extent, and hopefully we'll be able to get through everything in an hour. Okay. All right, so why do people like to forage? Why do I like to forage? First thing that comes to mind is that it's really fun to wander around outside and find free, fresh food all over the place in places that you might not think to look for. You might not think that you could actually bring home enough for dinner on your morning dog walk. You might find something that you would never otherwise be able to get because a lot of things that are foraged are not commercially available for a variety of reasons. Foraging you can do at any level. I would consider it foraging if when you're a 5-year-old you pick the a little honeysuckle flower off a vine and bite off the end and suck the nectar out. And it's also foraging if you try to go out for a week in the wilderness and eat nothing but stuff that you can find, or just make a big dinner. You can experience interesting tastes and textures that you wouldn't otherwise be able to get because a lot of these things are not commercially available, and they're things that don't either have a long shelf life or are a little bit oddball, and so you can try new things. It gives you a little bit of independence. If, for example, we had a global pandemic and it might be difficult to get to the grocery store, you can still go out and get fresh greens or berries and things like that and save yourself a masked trip to Trader Joe's. And importantly, foraging is an opportunity to learn more about plants and their biology and ecology. You have to learn to identify plants to be able to eat them, and I will stress that many times in the next little while. And one other thing that I realize I like about foraging is that it's a way to follow and appreciate the passage of the seasons. So when I see the when June rolls around, I know that the service berries are going to be coming into fruit. when the pawpaws are ripe. I know school's about to start, and a lot of these plants in the DC area have seasonality. And I'm a Californian. Even I did a lot of foraging in California, and the California plants have seasonality too. It's just not quite as pronounced as ours is. Okay. So here are my basic guidelines and cautions. And I want to emphasize that plants can be poisonous, and you have to really make sure that you know what you're eating. So I really don't want anybody to leave this talk this evening and say, that looks kind of like what that lady showed me. Let's have this for dinner. It is really important to make sure that you definitively identify what you're eating. And I chose plants that I think are pretty easy to feel confident about, but double check and make sure that you know what you're eating. One thing that not everybody appreciates is that different parts of a single plant can be edible and other parts of that same plant can be toxic. So many of you are probably familiar with the idea that you can eat the red petiole or stem of a rhubarb leaf, but you can't eat the leaf tissue itself because it's poisonous. You can eat asparagus shoots, but if you let your asparagus go and it produces red berries later on in the season, they're toxic, so you can't eat those. You can eat the very young leaves of pokeweed, but the older leaves and the fruits are toxic. So it's not one-stop shopping. You need to know what you're doing. Another thing that I think is worth saying out loud is that just because a bird eats a berry doesn't mean that you can eat the berry, because they have different physiologies and different digestive systems than we do. And there's a lot of fruits that birds love to gobble up in the summer and the fall that would knock us down. So we're our own organism, and you can't assume that if you see a robin eating something that we can too. This is just common sense, but you want to make sure that you harvest from places that you think are relatively clean. I wouldn't forage by the side of the freeway. Obviously, industrial sites could have contaminated soils, heavy metal accumulations. You don't want to forage where there's a lot of trash or car exhaust. You want to stay out of the dog pee zone if you can. So these are all common sense things, but worth keeping in mind. You want to choose healthy plants or plant parts. I'll show you a picture later on of some lamb's quarters leaves that I did not pick this morning because they had some kind of weird fungus, which I thought I didn't want to eat. You need to keep your eyes open as you forage. The very first and worst case of poison oak I ever got in California was when I spent a couple of happy hours in a blackberry bush. And I must have picked a gallon of blackberries, and I got a case of poison oak so bad that it wrecked my entire summer. So be on the lookout. Don't be greedy. You don't want to harvest rare plants. You don't want to harvest entire plants if you can avoid it. There's a lot of plants where you can just take the leaves and not pull up the whole plant so that you can leave the roots and the meristem behind and it can keep growing. There are some classic examples of popularly harvested plants like ginseng or ramps, which are wild leeks that populations have been decimated because people just pull up the whole plant. And of course, don't harvest from private property without permission. So with those caveats, on we go. In getting ready for my talk, I did some browsing on the internet, and I found someone named Green Dean, and he runs a site called Eat the Weeds, which I thought looked pretty good, and I put in the link here. At the end, if we want, we can send a couple of links for people who want to follow up on things. But he has what I thought was kind of a handy way to think about this. He says every time you are thinking about eating a plant, you need to itemize it. And item, I-T-E-M, for him means identify it beyond doubt. So make sure that you know what it is, and that you're very confident in the identification. The second thing is to make sure it is growing or fruiting at the right time of the year for tea. Make sure it's growing in the right environment. It might be, you want to make sure for identification purposes that it's growing in the right place. If there's something that is growing in a place it shouldn't be growing, it might look like the thing you think it is, but not be that. And making sure that it's getting, that it's in a good habitat. So for example, watercress, you would only want to harvest from a place where you could be pretty confident that the water was clean. And then the method of preparation is really important as well. So some things need to be cooked, some things you need to rinse the water 3 times before you eat them. So item, I thought, was a good way to think about stuff before you put it in your mouth. Okay, and I don't want to hit you over the head too much with a frying pan, but plants are chemical factories. Their whole job is to make chemicals so that they can protect themselves from herbivores and fungus. And in fact, it's important for us that plants are chemical factories because we rely on plant chemicals for most of our medicines, drugs, illicit and otherwise, herbs and spices. So Taxol comes from the Pacific yew tree, aspirin's from the willow tree, quinine from the cinchona tree, codeine comes from the opium poppy, basil and mint and cloves and cinnamon. All of these are plant chemicals that we rely on for all kinds of things that improve our daily lives. But some plants are super toxic to people and even in little doses can kill you. And poisonous plants can give you skin rashes, they can give you digestive problems and make you throw up or give you diarrhea, they can impact your nervous system. There are lots of hallucinogenic plants that can cause you trouble, or they can give you heart problems. So again, I don't want to scare you off from foraging, but I want you to take seriously the idea that you really need to know what you're eating. And for my last whack with the frying pan, this is another resource I came across online from a place called Green Belly, and they have a nice identification guide to poisonous plants, and all of these beauties that you see in front of you are toxic in one way or another. And so something that looks nice could be a problem waiting to happen. All right, so I mentioned what's good for a bird might not be good for you. Pokeweed berries, Virginia creeper berries, which look like a luscious Concord grape, and yew berries, all can make you plenty sick. You want to look for healthy plants in clean environments. When I was picking my Chenopodium this morning, on the left here, you see that some of the leaves have big yellow spots on them, and those are fungus spots, and so I wouldn't eat those. The ones above them look fine, and so I did collect some of those. And then I wish I had a nice picture of something edible growing next to Highway 66, but this is Chesapeake Street, and you can see that that doesn't look like really the nicest place to choose something to eat. So that goes without saying. One little tip for foraging is that what's underfoot can often show you what's overhead. And I might not be paying attention to what time of year it is, but when I see the sidewalk looking like it does on the left, I know to look up and say, oh, the mulberries are ripe. Same with persimmon trees. I have found many persimmon trees in the neighborhood when I've been out for a walk and I see squashed dried persimmons on the ground, and then I have found a new tree. Okay, and just a visual reminder that of my sad poison oak story. This is some nice garlic mustard, the leaves in the front, and I was about to stick my hand in to pick them, and then saw this beautiful poison ivy, and the garlic mustard would not have been worth the rash that I would get from the poison ivy. So keep your eyes open and make sure that you focus on the whole everything before you take the plunge. Okay. When we forage, you might think that ordinarily what we eat is either the fruits or the leaves, but really we eat every single part. As humans, we eat every single parts of plants, and as foragers, we also look for all kinds of plant parts. We eat leaves, we eat stems and shoots, we eat vegetative buds as well as flower buds. We eat flowers and seeds and fruits. We eat a lot of the underground storage tissues that the plants use to store their photosynthate over the winter. So these might be tubers or bulbs or rhizomes. Think about potatoes or onions or ginger. We eat bark, saps and resins, pollen and nectar in the form of honey or in the form of nectar and honeysuckle. So we eat all kinds of parts of plants, and you can be a low-key forager and just suck on a honeysuckle. You can be a heavy-duty forager and dig up roots and extract starch from them and make bread out of it. There's every level that you can participate in. Okay, and then the other thing that I mentioned at the beginning that I want to emphasize is that there's a really nice seasonality with foraging, and we focus on different things at different times of the year. So in the spring, we eat a lot of leaves and flowers and shoots, and if you look at the picture down in the lower left, you can see violet flowers and redbud flowers, and there's violet leaves, and I see some bittercress leaves, and I see some hosta leaves, and so that's a beautiful salad in late April, early May. The berries in the upper right are from 2 weeks ago. The middle of the summer is berry time. There's also leaves around, but that's when really the nice, sweet summer, juicy summer fruits come out. And then the fall, we get a lot of fruits and nuts and seeds. And then in the winter, we're left with seeds that are long storing seeds, or things that underground storage parts of plants, or any jams or jellies or preserves that we were thoughtful enough to prepare in the summer so that we could have some serviceberry sunshine on our toast in the winter. All right, I'm going to stop there for a second and see if anybody has any questions before I leap into specific plants.
We do have a couple of questions. I'll just read them to you.
Okay.
Well, someone had asked what type of books that we can recommend to get started with foraging.
I'd be happy to recommend a couple books, and what we could do is at the end I can send you, Diane, a list of a few books, but this is a book that I like that we're using for my class called Edible Wild Plants by Tom Elias and Peter Dykeman, and I chose it in part because it's the whole country, and once I realized that our students might not be coming back, and some of my students will be foraging in Liechtenstein, and some of them will be in Honolulu, and some will be in San Francisco. This isn't going to help the Liechtenstein student, but in any event, this is for the whole country, and it's got a section on poisonous plants as well, so I like this one. There's some websites that are good. There's some websites that are crappy and suggest that you eat things that maybe you shouldn't eat, so I will make a list at the end, Diane, of what I think are some good books, and maybe you could send it out to people who are interested.
Yes, I can just send a follow-up email to everyone who registered. That would be great. And maybe we could even get some of those books in our ANS bookshop.
Okay.
Here's another question from Judy. Would the garlic mustard have been contaminated by the poison ivy, even if picked with gloves on?
I think that's a great question, and I think that's a very good point, that the garlic mustard leaves could have hit the poison ivy leaves, and the urushiol oil on the poison ivy could have gotten onto the garlic mustard, and yeah, you could, I mean, if you were sensitive, you could perhaps end up with a rash. So not only do you not want your hand to get on it, but you don't want to eat something. So that's a great question, Judy, and yes, I would definitely be careful there.
Thank you. Anna was wondering, could a berry be toxic at one stage and edible when in another, like when it matures?
That's a good question. So I'm not sure if it would be well, actually, certainly unpalatable at one stage and palatable at another. And hang on to that thought because we're going to be talking about pawpaws, which are horrible if you eat them before they're ripe and probably could make you kind of sick if you could manage to choke the whole thing down. So certainly unpalatable if not toxic.
Thanks. Here's a different Judy was wondering, are hosta leaves edible?
They are when they are young. And my talk was, I looked at my initial talk and said, that's about 3 hours. And so I edited out a lot of stuff. And I had a nice picture of hosta shoots that are just coming up when they're still kind of furled in a cone. And you can cut those and slice them and saute them with wild field garlic, and they're delicious. But a hosta leaf right now would be really tough and I wouldn't eat it. So a young and tender leaf can be really good, and an old mature leaf can be terrible.
Thanks. I think that answers Brianna's question too. Janice asked, can you talk about foraging restrictions in national parks?
Yes, you should not forage in national parks. You're technically not allowed to, although I'm glad you asked that question because I was looking up something about pawpaws today and I found something from a federal site, and it wasn't the National Park Service, but it was a national something or other, talking about pawpaws along the Potomac. And I think most of that is park land, but they had tips on how to find and harvest pawpaws off the ground. And so maybe the fact that the pawpaws fall is different than picking them, but you shouldn't be picking in national parks. I think some state parks allow you to pick, but others don't.
Okay. Anna had asked, is there a reference to know when certain berries are ready to be picked? For example, the mulberries you showed.
Yeah, and that's another great question. So berries differ in what color they are when they're ripe, and so and some of that is a little bit trial and error. But there are some fruits, for example, that are unripe when they're green, and when they're ripe, they're bright red. So think of raspberries, right? A green raspberry turns red and then it's ready. But if you ate a blackberry when it was the color of a raspberry, you would regret it because it's the unripe, a nice unripe blackberry looks like a raspberry, and a blackberry has to turn all the way dark purple to be able to be edible. So it's not that there is one answer for all fruits, but you need to sort of know for each fruit what its ripeness is going to be, and the softness and the texture, and when it falls off the plant, and when it's ready to pick. All of those things are important information. And I have some berry pictures later on that I'll show you, and I can show you a couple other little pointers.
Thanks, Martha. And there's one more question for now. Someone told me they eat the bamboo shoots when they are young and tender. Is that okay?
Yes, but young and tender, I have never managed to get them young and tender because they are super young. And so, but I've seen them in the Chinese markets at the Great Wall out in Rockville. They sell bamboo shoots, and they're just coming up from the ground, and they're maybe a foot tall, and they're all rolled up, and they're a pointy shoot, and you wouldn't even, it doesn't look, I mean, it would be growing in a bamboo patch, but it doesn't have leaves, it doesn't have stems, it's just a kind of a tidy bundle all folded up and shooting up out of the ground. So I wouldn't take that to mean a young bamboo leaf. The shoot it's at a really early stage.
Okay, great. Well, let's keep going, and we'll stop a little bit later for more questions.
Actually, I think we're going to press on now. But I'm actually doing splendidly. We're not even to halftime. So I think we'll be okay to have time for questions at the end. But everybody write down your questions if there's things that you're wondering as we go. Okay, so what I want to do now is show you some things that are my staples that I've really liked, and then a few things that have not been so great. And I'll just give a little shout out to a foraging walk that we took at Georgetown a couple of falls ago. I try to do a fall foraging walk and a spring foraging walk, and I can tell that this is a fall walk because there are crab apples and cranberries, which didn't come from Georgetown, but lots of nice fall things, and the students are always really excited to walk around on campus and find things that we can eat. Okay, so one thing that I really love that is in great abundance right now is lamb's quarters or Chenopodium album. And my dog Okra is in the bottom right, and that is this morning. I went out at 9 o'clock this morning and I picked about 2 pounds of lamb's quarters, and I like it so much that whenever I go get some, I get twice as much as I want, and I blanch it, which I'll show you in a minute, and then I freeze half of it so that in the winter, it's like frozen spinach, but I like it better than spinach because it's got a little more heft to it. It doesn't dissolve quite as much, but it's got a really nice nutty flavor. So it grows all over the place. It's a super common weed. It's from Europe. The leaves, it's in the same family as quinoa, and maybe spinach too, honestly. But one thing that is really distinctive about it that I tried to indicate in this picture on the right is that the leaves, especially the young leaves, have these furry hairs on them. They're called farinaceous. It's got a farinaceous or flowery covering, and so when you pick it or when you touch the leaf, it should feel kind of powdery and even a little rough. And you can eat this plant raw, but a lot of people, myself included, don't love the kind of powdery texture. So I rinse it in water in a salad spinner, and then I blanch it for a minute in boiling water, and it turns that bright green on the left. And if I want to save some, then I freeze it at that stage. If I want to have it for dinner, then I can do all kinds of things with it. But what I like to do is saute it with garlic, in a little bit of olive oil and garlic. And in this case, I have also put in some daylily buds, which we'll be getting to in a minute. So Chenopodium is out right now. Like I said, I collected 2 pounds this morning. It's all over the place. When I pick it, let me go back if I can. I just pick the top shoots and I pull them off the stem. There's no point in picking the whole stalk because the stalk is tough and the leaves, it's not worth pulling individual leaves off the stem. So I take little clusters, and that's what I use. But it's really good, and I recommend that people try that. Garlic mustard is a super common weed around here. It's another very invasive weed that is kind of wrecking Rock Creek Park from Europe. It is on the way out right now, so it's not something that you'll find much of right now. But the young leaves and the young shoots and the flowers are really good. They're kind of sharp and a little bit bitter and garlicky tasting. I really like it raw. Some people find it a little too punchy. You can also steam it or saute it. And I like to put the flowers in salads. And this is another good one. And sometimes if you go for a walk in Rock Creek Park in May, you'll see what's kind of a dispiriting sight, which is an entire understory filled with garlic mustard. So it's depressing, but it's an opportunity for you to actually, so I'm breaking my national park rule here because it's an invasive weed that the Park Service itself is trying to get rid of. And so I don't feel bad pulling up garlic mustard from the park, but I probably should check with somebody to make sure that I can say that out loud, but I've seen rangers go out and they're pulling out the plants and bundling them up and taking them away. Okay, service berries. These were a discovery for me that they really sort of came into my vision about 5 or 6 years ago, and they're native around here. The genus name is Amelanchier. They're in the rose family, but they're also planted in DC, and Casey Trees has started planting them all over the city, and at Georgetown they're planted all over our campus. And they're like a tree that is laden with blueberries, but with even a little bit more flavor. So they're super delicious. They start out magenta, and then they turn dark purple, and then you can see in the sort of lower left of the picture on the left that they turn even beyond eggplant, a really sort of night sky blue. And that's when they're really ripe, but the purple ones are good too. And they're delicious raw on your cereal or in your yogurt. I also make them into pies. I always make serviceberry jam, which is what I'm doing in the bottom right there. And this year, because of the pandemic, nobody was on campus. And usually I incite everyone on campus to pick serviceberries because I don't like them to go to waste, even leaving plenty for the birds. But there was nobody to pick serviceberries, so the trees were just laden. So I collected a couple of gallons of serviceberries, I'm sure. I am going to digress into some interesting biology because the picture at the top doesn't look like the berries at the picture of the top don't look like the ones on the left, and that's because they are host to an interesting, weird fungus that has a complicated life cycle, and half of its life cycle is on eastern red cedar, which is a juniper tree. And in the early spring, the juniper trees basically sprout what looks like an orange gelatinous sea anemone from the stem of the juniper tree. It's a completely crazy looking thing, and that is one phase of the fungus, which makes spores in the early spring, and they blow on the wind to plants in the rose family, and then they infect the plants in the rose family and produce another kind of spores. And so these little funnels that look like they're squirting out the stuff that's on Cheetos or Cheez-Its are berries that you would not pick. But if you have some of those spores on berries next to adjacent berries that you do pick, they won't hurt you, and you'll rinse the berries before you eat them anyway. But the fungus doesn't hurt you, but it does turn the fruits to these sort of orange, weird munitions devices. And this year we did not have a lot of fungus on the service berries. Last year we lost almost the whole crop, and I think it has to do with when the rains come in the fall. But if you see, once you start walking around and you start noticing serviceberry trees, sometimes you'll see these orange things, and it's not that it's the wrong kind of tree, it's that it's got a fungus. Okay. All right, then there's mulberries. I don't love mulberries because I think they're kind of insipid in flavor, but they are really common. And I loved picking them when I was younger. And this is what you feed your silkworms as well, their leaves. And you can make some mulberry jam if you put some orange peel or something in it. You can punch up the flavor a little bit. Mulberry muffins are fun. And they're always good on yogurt. So lots of mulberries around. In response to the earlier question, here the ripe ones are the shiny black color, and the whitish and pinkish ones are not quite ripe. If you're cooking them, it's fine to have some that aren't entirely ripe, but they won't be as sweet. Okay, flowers. Lots of flowers are edible. And in the early spring, I love going out and collecting violets from my yard, or red bud flowers from a red bud tree, or black locust robinia flowers and putting them in salads or decorating a cake with them or putting them on fruit or whatever. They look pretty, but they also taste good because they're kind of crunchy and they have a little bit of nectar in them. So there's a little bit of sweetness in them too. So pay attention to the flowers, and you can definitely eat them. Not all flowers, but you can eat flowers in the springtime. And these are good ones to start with. Daylilies are another plant that is super common in the DC area. There's a species daylily called Hemerocallis fulva, which is, I think, the most common one that you see. It really kind of spreads like a weed. It's this orange one, and the flowers as well as the buds are totally edible. I think that there might be a root or a tuber that's also edible, although I never tried it. I was reading today and I found that some of the cultivated varieties or cultivars might not be edible. So if you have a weird daylily that doesn't look like your basic generic daylily, maybe don't go for that. So these, you can eat the whole flower. You can put it in a batter and fry it, which I've never done. But you can also pick the buds, and those little things that look like sawed off green beans on the bottom left are daylily buds, which I love to cook. You can either steam them and they taste like green beans, or you can saute them. And when I make kinopodium, I often throw in some daylily buds just to have a little contrast in texture. And then the other thing that is super fun to do with daylilies is to use them as an edible goblet for yogurt or ice cream. And my very agreeable husband served as a model to show how it's done, so that you really get the idea that you can eat the whole cup. So I made him some serviceberry yogurt. I took some of my serviceberry jam and smushed it up in some yogurt and loaded it up in a daylily, and he eats the whole thing, and the cup is gone, and no muss, no fuss. And so that's a fun thing to do. And had I figured this out when I had little kids, they would have complained if I tried to do it at their birthday parties, but maybe your kids will be more agreeable. Josh, by the way, who is watching downstairs, has been a very patient and agreeable tester for a lot of my recipes. He draws the line sometimes when I brought home pokeweed, which we'll get to in a little while, which is toxic at a lot of stages. I brought home young leaves, which you're supposed to boil, throw out the water, boil, throw out the water, boil, throw out the water, and then eat. And he decided to wait to see if I died before he tried it. And when I survived the test case, he did try it the next day. But it's another one that's in my probably not worth the trouble category. Okay, so this is another plant that I think probably a lot of people in the DC area are really familiar with. This is field garlic, Allium vineale, and this is this stuff that is a weird looking kind of, where'd that come from, grassy thing that sprouts up in your lawn. And if you pick a leaf or you run over it with your lawnmower and it smells oniony, that's field garlic. Another useful thing that I read today is that if something looks like an onion and smells like an onion, it's not poisonous. If something looks like an onion and doesn't smell like an onion, it could be poisonous. But if it passes the oniony, garlicky test and it's got long kind of chivy looking leaves, it's okay. So I often pick this stuff and use it for chives, but I have come up with a new discovery this spring, which I'm excited to tell you about. So these things, when they flower, often do this weird thing, which you can see on the left-hand side. And instead of making flowers, this little head at the top ought to be flowers, but instead they make little tiny onion bulbs that are called bulbils. And each of those bulbils can sprout its own little stem. So you can see at the top, these little sort of squiggly Medusa things are onion leaves tiny onion leaves coming out of the tiny bulbils. So each one of those things, when it falls off, can grow a new onion plant. So, and they taste like little tiny baby onions. So I collected a bunch of them, which we see in the upper panel on the left-hand pile, and they look sort of like popcorn. And this was my brilliant innovation. I pickled them in cider vinegar and a little bit of salt and sugar, and they turned into these beautiful sort of pomegranate seeds. And it takes a little bit of the edge off of the onion, and then I use them for putting in salads and potato salads and on these very glamorous deviled eggs. So they're pretty much done now, but next year keep an eye out for the field garlic bulbils, because I think they're the next big thing for garnish. You heard it here first. Okay, then here are a couple of things that I'm saving you the trouble of trying. On the left, I had read that the root of garlic mustard, you can dig up and grate it, and that it's like horseradish. But my daughter Isabel, who may or may not be here listening, gave it a thumbs down verdict. She says it tastes like sawdust, but much worse. So that's definitely a don't waste your time as far as I'm concerned. And then on the right is stinging nettle. And anybody who's walked into stinging nettle inadvertently wearing shorts in the summer would say, you're out of your mind. Why would you eat stinging nettle? But there are stinging nettle aficionados. And when the leaves are young, you put on gloves and you can harvest the plant, and then you take it and you boil it, and that deactivates the urticating, stinging hairs. And it takes a leap of faith to put one of these leaves in your mouth if you have, in fact, been stung by nettles even after they're boiled. They don't sting you, but they taste fuzzy and furry. And Isabel and I also thought that these were not worth the trouble. But lots of people are way into stinging nettles, so we had to give it a try. And then the last thing that I'm kind of on the fence about, this is the first year I tried this. I found a site online where a nice Western forager cowboy type was showing how to saute broadleaf plantain inflorescences over his campfire, and he thought they were the best things that he'd ever had. So I spent quite a long time collecting the flower stalks of these broadleaf plantains. This is a super common invasive lawnweed. They look like little green snakes and kind of cute. So I parboiled them, and then I sauteed them, my usual treatment with garlic and olive oil and salt, and they tasted like tough little green snakes. That was after 2 cookings. They weren't bad, but they weren't great. And then the next day I mixed them in with some leftover zucchini and heated that up again. And on the 3rd cooking, I thought they were pretty good. So again, I wouldn't spend a lot of time collecting broadleaf plantain inflorescences, but if you're starving in your backyard, they won't hurt you, and that's an option. Okay, so what's available right now? This is the picture that I had on the first panel, which is what my dog Okra and I picked this morning. So we see the broadleaf plantain inflorescences in the front. Behind that is sorrel, which I'm going to tell you about in a little bit. On the right is a big pile of chenopodium leaves. Then those things that look like tiny corn cobs are daylily buds. We found a little cache of ripe blackberries. There is some purslane behind the blackberries, which I love, and I'll tell you about in a minute. Some daylily flowers, that's what Josh got his yogurt in, and then some violet leaves, which are kind of blah, but if you make a salad and you mix your violet leaves with your purslane and your sorrel leaves, it's pretty good. And then there's an onion bulb that instead of making, an onion inflorescence that instead of making bulbils made flowers, and you could throw the flowers into that salad too to punch it up a little bit. So that's all. Oh, and actually there's peppergrass in the upper right, and those, you can't see it very well, but that's a little mustard, and the little fruits of that mustard are pretty spicy, but add a nice little taste to salad or a quesadilla or something like that. So this is all right now. I already told you about the Chenopodium. Now I'll tell you about the purslane. If anybody's a gardener, I almost guarantee that this stuff is coming up between your tomatoes and your zucchini. It's a super common weed in disturbed soils. I love it. It is a little bit fleshy. It's nutty. It's got a nice texture and a nice flavor. I eat it raw in salads. I steam it, and I really look forward to it. And it's something that you've probably been pulling out of your garden and throwing away. It often has a kind of a reddish stem. It has little sessile flowers that don't have a stem, and it's really good. You shouldn't eat a gallon of it. It has might have oxalic acid. I'm not sure what it has in it, but you're not supposed to eat a ton of it. But I think a generous helping is not a ton. And it also has a lot of omega-3 fatty acids. So there are a lot of proponents online that just sing the praises of purslane. And then the other thing that I love right now, and this picture was from pretty recently, is wood sorrel. And this is another thing that's a super common weed. The leaves look a lot like clover, but I have put a handy picture in the bottom right with wood sorrel and clover right next to each other, where when you compare them side by side, you can see that the wood sorrel or oxalis has heart-shaped leaves of 3, and the clover has round leaves. So you can see the clover on the bottom diagonal half of that picture and the sorrel on the top. And so the sorrel has these heart-shaped leaves. They are have oxalic acid in them so that they're really sour and lemony. And you can eat the flowers. You can eat the leaves. And my other discovery this spring is that they make these cute little candelabra fruits that look like a little taper on a little candle holder, and they're tender and crunchy and really nice also. So I put those in salads too. So wood sorrel's out right now. There's also a purple sorrel, a sorrel that has purple flowers that you can eat and is also good. Here's the berries. Wine berries are more closely related to raspberries, and we found some of these in the woods the other day. They are when they're unripe, they're kind of peachy, pinky colored, and when they're ripe, they turn bright orange, bright red. And you can see in the picture that they come off like a raspberry and they leave the receptacle behind. So there's a cone that stays on the fruit. Blackberries are unripe when they're red. So you can actually see that the unripe blackberry and the ripe wineberry are almost the identical color. But the blackberries, if you ate that red blackberry, it would be horrible. And the black blackberry is good, but it doesn't leave a little cap behind. You pick the whole thing off. And there's also cloudberries, wineberries, blackberries, dewberries. They're all in the genus Rubus, and they're all edible. And they're all happening now. Okay. All right, so that's what's happening now. And then I'm just going to give you a quick preview of coming attractions. How are we doing on time? We have about 8 more minutes. So I'm going to whip through what's coming up in the late summer and fall. So you'll have them on your radar screen. Pawpaws are a special treat that I never had until I came to the East Coast. Besides being a plant person, I'm a bug person. And so at my lab at Georgetown, I planted a bunch of pawpaw trees because they are the host plant for the very beautiful zebra swallowtail butterfly. The female only lays her eggs on the leaves of this plant. And it was an added bonus years later when my zebra swallowtail host plants started producing pawpaw fruits. And they are the northern most representative of a tropical family, the custard apple or soursop family called the Annonaceae, and most of them are in Mexico and Central America. But our pawpaw is our very own legit native tropical fruit. They look like a green potato. They stay on the plant until they are ripe, at which point they drop off, and then it's you against the squirrels. And so I meant to put a picture in, but I have come up with a method. Once my pawpaws are getting big, I take a mesh bag and I put it around the pawpaws and I tie it on the branch, and then the pawpaws drop into the bag. It gives me at least a little bit of an edge on the squirrels. I have had squirrels chew through my mesh bags, but gives me a little bit of a head start. And then some of my pawpaws hang over a steep cliff too, and so I can keep them before they fall down the cliff. They have a really soft, fragrant, custardy fruit. It smells sort of like bananas, but also a little bit mango-y and a little citrusy and a little piney. Some people love them. Some crazy people don't like them. But I think they're really a nice, evocative, short-lived fruit. You don't see them in the markets because, as I said, you have to wait until they are ripe before they drop, and then they're around for 2 weeks. So you have to jump on it when the pawpaws are ready. This is pawpaw foliage. There's a ton. They like to have their feet kind of damp. There are a ton of them along the C&O Canal, all along the rivers in our region. There are lots and lots of pawpaw trees. I saw a ton of pawpaw flowers this spring, so I think we should have a decent fruit crop this fall. Persimmons are another highlight coming up. There's a persimmon tree in my neighborhood, and the fruits are now green and about the size of, they're maybe the size of a lima bean. So they're coming along. This is another native tree. This is Diospyros virginiana. They have this characteristic nubbly alligatory bark. If you're familiar with the commercial persimmons, the hachia and the fuyu persimmons in the grocery stores, these are similar in some ways, but they're much smaller. They're maybe the size of a small plum, and they have a lot of seeds. If you eat these, you have to wait until they drop to the ground before you eat them. So we're dipping into a little more biology. Persimmons undergo a process called bletting, which in and of itself is a bonus for tonight because you get to learn this great new word. And bletting is a process of secondary ripening that certain fleshy fruits have to undergo before you can eat them. And persimmons are filled with tannin. And if you eat a persimmon before it's ripe, you will remember it and blame your mother for it for pretty much the rest of your life, because they have so much tannin in them. They make you feel like your mouth gets all puckered up and your teeth feel like they have grown a wall-to-wall carpet on them, and it lasts for a while. So you want to make sure that you don't eat a persimmon that hasn't bletted. So I wait until they drop to the ground, and I have a neighbor who has a big persimmon tree and he hates persimmons. So for a month and a half in the fall, my dog and I walk over there with our Tupperware every morning and we collect all the persimmons from his lawn. And then what do we do with them? We put them in the colander and we mush them with a wooden spoon, and then we get a persimmon puree, which we use to make persimmon bread. And I will put the recipe for delicious persimmon bread in our resources. Or I just blob it on my yogurt, and it's sweet and a little slippery, and I really like it. This is another thing that some people hate, but I think that the people who hate it have had unbledded persimmons and they don't realize how good it could be. Okay, another thing that is new to me this year, and that's another thing that's so fun about foraging, is that you can be living in a place for 20 years and not realize that you're walking by something every single day, is beech nuts. And I think everybody knows what an American beech tree looks like. Rock Creek Park and a lot of the parks around here are full of beech trees. They're the ones that their trunks look like an elephant's leg. They're a big, gray, smooth trunk with simple leaves with parallel veins that are parallel on either side of a midrib, and they make these little fruits that have little spines on them, and they crack open in the fall, and inside are these beautiful little, either 2 or 3 little sort of round pyramidal seeds. And these things are related to acorns, and we're going to get to acorns in a minute. Acorns are horribly bitter, and I would never suggest that you eat a raw acorn, but for whatever reason, beeches are not. And so you can just pick them off the tree or pick them off the ground, crunch them in your teeth, and eat them like sunflower seeds. And then just when you're walking in the woods, they're a nice little snack. You can, if you find a beech tree, you can just put some in your pocket and chew on them and spit out the seeds. Or for a more labor-intensive preparation, if you have a bunch of people over, you can give everybody a little bowl of beech nuts and say you get your dinner after you have opened up 15 beech nuts, and then you can either eat them raw, or I dry roasted them in a cast iron pan, and they're nutty and really good. So beech nuts, I think, is one that you couldn't mess up in terms of identification, and they're really fun. And then Chinese chestnuts. The important thing for me to mention here is that these are not the same as horse chestnuts. Horse chestnuts are toxic. I didn't put in a picture of a horse chestnut because I didn't think of it, but the nuts themselves look really similar. The fruits, which are the outside that the nut is held in, look really different. So Chinese chestnuts have these super spiny coverings, and if you don't either prick your hand on them or step on them in your sandals and swear because they hurt your feet, then it's probably not a Chinese chestnut tree. They're super sharp. But you can find these on the ground, and you have to beat the beetles, but you can get the chestnuts. And a lot of the chestnuts that are sold in the grocery store in the fall for the chestnuts roasting on an open fire thing are Chinese chestnuts. You cut an X in them and roast them in the oven, and they're delicious. So the American chestnuts were extirpated by the chestnut. I don't remember if the chestnuts were a blight or a beetle, but anyway, they're gone from our forests. And so you'll find Chinese chestnuts planted hither and yon. And there's one that happens to grow at Georgetown Day School near my house. And so Okra and I go there after we go to the persimmon tree to check for chestnuts. Okay, almost there. This is a spice bush fruit. This is a little thing that you won't necessarily, that you don't have to know, but I find that this is really a nice spice. And the bottom right shows green fruits. This is what they looked like yesterday. They're green, but they're coming along, and they're going to turn this bright toenail polish red, and then they'll be ripe. And you do not eat them like a fruit. They're super strong. That would be like eating a nutmeg or something like that. So what I do is I take them and I grind them into my mortar and pestle, and I consider them a key ingredient in my persimmon bread. They have a delicious cinnamony, anisey, clovey, a little bit of maybe piney taste, and they're really good. So I collect those and then I dry them. And then this is one that you're going to say you're out of your mind. You guys all probably know about ginkgo trees. They smell like vomit. And when I say they smell like vomit, I'm not kidding. They have butyric acid in the seed coats. These aren't fruits, they're seeds, because ginkgos are a gymnosperm, like a pine tree. They don't have fruits, they're just seeds, but the outer coat of the seed has gotten fleshy, and it has this butyric acid in it, which is the same thing as is found in vomit and rancid butter. And so most people rightly steer clear of ginkgo trees, but I have found a way to deal with ginkgo trees, and this is for the diehards. I don't expect everybody to be heading out there for the ginkgo trees, but if anybody's on jury duty in DC, there's a whole bunch of ginkgo trees by the courthouse, and if you're on the same jury duty schedule as I am, you'll be hard pressed to ignore all of these ginkgo seeds. but I just smash them with my foot, and this little thing that looks like a pistachio pops out. And then I pick them up with a bag, almost like you're picking up dog poop, the inside out bag thing. Then you take them home and you wash them, and there is no more vomit smell after you wash them. And then you can either boil them or roast them, or what I discovered worked really well is to put them in a cast iron pan with a little bit of oil, and I fry them, and they pop, just a tiny bit of oil, and they pop open, and they're this beautiful green color, and they're sort of translucent and soft inside, and with a little bit of salt, they're delicious. So this isn't foraging 101, this is foraging 201 because of the smell and the preparation, but I think it's worth it. And they're super popular. You often find Chinese grandmothers collecting and Japanese grandmothers collecting ginkgos because they're very popular in Asia. You can buy dried ones in Asian grocery stores. And if you're really ready to go off the deep end, which of course I have, acorns are the next frontier. Acorns are super abundant fruit. They are, there's really no reason that you would ever do this unless you had lost your mind, but you have to take them, you have to peel them, you have to crack open the acorn thing, you have to take the fruit out. Half of them probably have beetles in them, so you have to get twice as many as you need so that you don't have beetles. Then you have to grind them up into a slurry, and then they're filled with tannins. And so then you have to leach out the tannins in running water, or you can do it over the course of a month in your refrigerator, and then you make flour. And then from your acorn flour, you can make cute little maple acorn cookies in the shape of squirrels, and that makes it totally worthwhile. They taste good. I don't know that they taste as good as the 300 hours that it takes you to make your acorns, but it's pretty fun. And then underneath the acorns to the left is persimmon bread, and that's a blob of persimmon on the vanilla ice cream for our classy dessert. Okay, and this is the get ready for what's next. I said for those of you who are truly adventurous, this isn't 101, this isn't 201, this is 501. A year from now, the periodical cicadas are going to be coming back out, and you can eat the cicadas. So I collect them when they are at this stage. They're called tenerals. They're white and soft, and they haven't hardened up. And I don't feel so bad about it because there are literally millions that will be crawling up out of the soil onto our trees, and they'll be getting smashed and eaten by dogs and run over by trucks. And so a few cicadas that are dry roasted and covered in chocolate will not be missed. There are also ways that you can prepare them with ginger and garlic and saute them with vegetables. I'm rebranding them as tree shrimp, and you can look forward to my tree shrimp and cicada book, my cicada cookbook and kids book, which I'm writing as we speak. So I think I'm all done. So what I'd like now is for people to emerge from behind my screen, and if anybody has any questions, ask questions or share your stories or just say hello.
Martha, while you hit you stop sharing your screen, I can read some questions from the chat.
Okay.
Oops, where did it go? Anna said, I'm in training to be a certified forest therapy guide. Part of our practicum is harvesting plants we can use to safely make tea. Any local suggestions besides dandelion?
Oh, I hate dandelion tea. I didn't even mention dandelions because, so I don't mean to trash dandelions, but there's tons of different things that you can make tea out of. And spice bush stems make a great tea, and that's a really good forest plant, and you can make it from the stems and the leaves. There are a lot of wild mints that you can make tea out of. There's a bunch of things that make nice teas that you can find in forests, but I think spice bush would be my first choice, and then some of the mints. Apparently blackberry leaves make good tea too. I haven't tried that.
Martha, do you have any thoughts on plants that may have been cultivated by the earliest Americans? I've seen info that goosefoot, sumpweed, little barley, erect knotweed may have been farmed and then became wild again post-cultivation.
Not a clue, but interesting.
Is lamb's quarter the one with bright purple on the top leaves?
There is a variety that has bright purple top leaves. Um, and I think it's sold as one that has purple. It's sold as a purple variant. The one that grows around here usually is just kind of a little bit pinkish on the top leaves, or sometimes it's just green, but it always has that kind of dusty hair on it.
Any special tools you use to forage?
No. When I go out, if there's certain things that I know I'm looking for, I like when I go to my neighbor's persimmon tree, I always bring a Tupperware because they are super gushy and they stand a little bit of a better chance of not just being a pile of goo when I get home if I have them in a Tupperware. When I go get Chinese chestnuts, I bring a pot holder because they are so sharp that I can't pick them up with my hands. And then a plastic bag or some kind of Ziploc bag that I usually keep in my my tote bag so that I can keep leaves a little bit fresh. But other than that, not really.
If you eat too much garlic mustard, can it upset your stomach? Like how much would be too much?
I mean, I think you'd have to eat a lot, and I think I don't I'd say maybe like a serving of spinach if either in sort of a handful either in a salad or cooked, I think would be fine. I've never had any trouble with it, but again, everybody reacts differently to different kinds of things. So I don't think I would eat a bathtub full, but I think uh, a portion of salad or some cooked spinach worth would be
Probably a good
totally fine.
idea when you're trying something new that you forage not to eat too much the first time. That's my
Exactly.
guess. Are
Exactly.
white and red mulberries both edible?
I think so. No, I don't really. I've heard of white mulberries, but I have not encountered white mulberries, and I think that white mulberries aren't white. I mean, so there's Morris Nigra and Morris Alba, and I think that white mulberries are red, and mostly I think I've seen black mulberries, and I think white mulberries are. I don't know about white mulberries. I'm not familiar with white mulberries.
If I might interject, I have seen white mulberries, and they, in my personal opinion, they are better than red mulberries. To me, they're sweeter. So yes, my anecdotal evidence.
Excellent. Well, as I said, I kind of dissed mulberries before. I think they're sort of insipid and don't have a lot of flavor, but there is variation between trees, and some of them are pretty blah, and some of them have a little bit more flavor.
Here's a question about the daylilies. Are they out in nature? I only see them for landscaping. I will eat my mom's landscaped ones. They look like the ones in your picture. How do you know
they've escaped out in nature. They become kind of a weed, and so sometimes when you're driving out country roads, there'll be big drifts of daylilies. I think they're not native here, although I'm not positive. I have a colleague who is a daylily fanatic, and he would be aghast that I don't know the whole history of daylilies. He's a card-carrying member of the Daylily Society, and
we won't tell him.
Don't tell.
Someone was wondering what Josh's shirt said. I don't know. Yes.
Josh's shirt says ITMFA, and I will just leave it right there.
Well, someone asked if it would be possible to send out the set of slides. Yeah, we can send a follow-up email to everyone, along with the suggestions that Martha had for books and websites. Here's another question: is clover edible?
I
In
don't
case
think
we confuse it with wood sorrel.
Well, eat one leaf, find out that it doesn't taste any good, that it's not lemony, and then don't eat anymore. I mean, I don't think it would hurt you, but I don't think it's great.
Okay. What advice do you have for
wood sorrel is a hard, clover's round.
Okay. What advice do you have for residents of DC with no car or yard?
I find stuff walking around. I mean, I picked all that stuff this morning on my way to Fort Reno, and at Fort Reno, which is just a park, you know, in weedy parks, weedy sidewalks, the stuff grows all over the place.
Great. For beech trees, are there two sexes of the trees with only one of them producing nuts?
Ooh, I should know that. I don't know.
Okay.
I think that there are mast years like oaks, and sometimes the beeches produce a ton of fruits and sometimes they don't, but I don't know what their sexual orientation is. Some of these plants are have separate male and female, and some of them are both on the same one. But last year was a big beech year, so maybe they're mast species as well. I have to look into that. I don't really know.
This is a good question, and maybe this could be another book you could write. Someone asked, is there a good foraging cookbook?
There are a couple of nice foraging cookbooks, and I have two of them, and I mostly use them for the pictures and the ideas, because a lot of the recipes are a little bit fussy and include a little bit of the foraged item in in some kind of duck with something or other that I wouldn't necessarily be making, but there's a couple that I like, and I'll write those down in the chat or in the thing that in our follow-up thing. One recipe or one preparation that I learned in one of these books was juniper sugar, and so I took little juniper, we call them fruits, but they're really sort of fleshy cones, and ground them up in my mortar and pestle and mix them up with sugar to make a sort of a juniper scented sugar. And then we use that to do the rim of our gin and tonic glasses, like salt on tequila, and it was glamoroso.
I don't see any more questions. I see a few comments and thank yous. But Tom said that beech trees are monoecious, both male and female flowers on the same tree. So thank you.
Thank you, Tom.
Oh, here's one more question. Is there any concern about contracting disease from cicadas?
I don't think so. I mean, so cicadas get a fungus, but I think the fungus that they don't get until they're tough old adults, and I wouldn't be eating those anyway. John, do you have any comments on contracting diseases from cicadas?
He said no, but the 17 years or 16 years ago, our dog did get severe constipation from eating too many.
I think there could be a constipation issue if you really overdo it on the cicadas, but I think you'd have to eat quite a lot of cicadas, and the teneros, those white cicadas, I think are a whole different operation than eating the tough wings and legs that our indiscriminate dogs do. But they're coming out a year from now, and it's going to be fantastic. So buckle your seatbelts.
It's going to be amazing. Get ready.
For early May.
Hopefully we'll be like moving out of the pandemic by then. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Martha. This was fantastic. And thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. It's great to see all of you.